Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning, and you're very welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. My name is Pat Murphy, Head of Environment Knowledge Transfer with Teagasc. This webinar is brought to you in association with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, Food Drink Ireland SkillNet, and the National Rural Network. This morning, we're delighted to be joined by Mick Houlihan from Bord Bia. Mick, you're very welcome. You're standing in for, we were due to have Deirdre Ryan, but Deirdre is indisposed, so you drew the short straw this morning.
Or maybe you drew the short straw, Pat. We'll see it. We'll see as we go.
Very good. Mick, you're a senior manager on ag sustainability with Bord Bia. We've been working, I suppose, with you over a number of years on the sustainability journey, and Bord Bia are, I suppose, heavily involved in, I suppose, three aspects. Would it be fair to say improving sustainability, showing that we've improved sustainability, and getting the message to the market that Irish food is sustainable?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose that's as Bord Bia, our role is the market and promotion of Irish food and drink nationally and internationally. But ultimately, anything that we do in terms of those promotions has to be based on solid, reliable facts, and those facts are generated through the Origin Green programme, which includes all the farm schemes as well as the participation of the food processors in developing sustainability plans, and it's all that information that allows us, be very confident in terms of stepping out in the marketplace and making very robust and solid claims in relation to the credentials of Irish food and drink from a quality and safety and traceability perspective, but also more importantly in recent times from a sustainability perspective.
Okay, and we're also joined by Andy. Andy will be helping out later with the questions, but Andy, you've many years of experience in this area as well, going back to working on dairy sustainability projects.
Yeah, I suppose when we began looking at sustainability, I remember back in the early 2008, 9, 10, 11, and it was a bit of a strange subject to be going out measuring water on farms or measuring electricity or doing a carbon footprint, but it's kind of become common language now.
Very good. Yeah.
Okay, great. So thanks very much, Pat and Andy, and look, it's great to get the opportunity to chat with everyone this morning, albeit I'm been subbed in, but hopefully you'll forgive me for that. So, as Pat mentioned, I'm Senior Manager for Agricultural Sustainability in Bord Bia. I've been working with Bord Bia for the best part of 10 years now, and initially would have been heavily involved in the rollout of the Sustainable Dairy Assurance Scheme and heavily involved in the Sustainable Beef and Lamb Assurance Scheme. And I suppose over the 10 years, you very much see how the role of sustainability and the importance of sustainability is increasing all the time. And obviously we're trying to reflect that in terms of how we operate schemes at farm level and at a processor level as well. And ultimately the Origin Green programme, I suppose, is the overarching framework that we have in place. And it is the world's only national sustainability programme for the food and drink industry. We celebrated 10 years of Origin Green last year, and it is still the only national sustainability programme in the world at the moment. So look, lots of other countries, lots of other organisations, are doing work in the sustainability space, developing initiatives and developing programmes, but I suppose none of them are matching the scale in relation to Origin Green, and the fact that we have such commitments right across the board, from farms all the way up through the processors and into food service and retailers now as well, that have committed to sustainability in the way that the Irish sector has. Again, it's something that's not matched anywhere else around the world as it stands at the moment. So I suppose the next couple of slides, or the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to try and talk a little bit about, I suppose, Origin Green and why it needs to evolve. So as I said, it's 10 years old, but it hasn't been the same for 10 years. As with any scheme or initiative or program or anything that we do in terms of our our work. We need to adapt, we need to change, we need to try and find ways to improve and stay ahead. We'll go through a few slides in terms of what's driving, I suppose, that need to change and adapt and evolve as well. And then I'll take you through some updates in terms of what's happening with the programme and changes that we are making this year, or some that have already come into effect, but more that will be working into the process as the year progresses on from here. So I suppose why do we need to evolve? Why do we need to change? There's a whole host of different reasons. Increasingly, we see that the big investors in the world are looking at their portfolios and trying to ensure that that their investments are solid from a sustainability perspective, and they're taking money out of companies and out of industries that are considered poor from an environmental perspective, taking money away from companies that have poor performance and poor records and poor reporting in relation to environment and sustainability, and moving that money towards companies and investments that they are confident in terms of their sustainability credentials. So, and that is we might kind of consider what billionaire investors are doing as not of very much relevance, but actually when they're moving money about in large volumes, if they're not moving them into companies that are relevant for us, well, then those companies struggle, and that has a knock-on effect in terms of their ability to trade and purchase and buy Irish produce down the line. From a policy perspective, everyone will be aware of Food Vision 2030 and the ambition that's included in there in terms of the growth of value and volume of exports from Ireland as well. But we have a challenge in there in that we have to try and balance that ambition with the targets that are set out in relation to the Climate Action Plan. And again, everyone will be aware of the target of a 25% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions for the agri sector by 2030. So policy challenge is something that's very real as well. From a consumer perspective, we do see from our own research and from other research around the world, we do see that customers or consumers believe that there's a responsibility on the industry and on the brands, I suppose, that they know and that they trust to support them in making sustainable choices as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a while as well. But also then from a regulatory perspective, there's lots starting to happen in this space, and that's happening already, and more kind of coming at us. And there's requirements on companies at the moment to have a non-financial reporting in place, and that very much links into sustainability and governance around all of that. But that non-financial reporting directive is being replaced by the corporate sustainability reporting directive, which will go an awful lot further than the previous directive. And it will bring an awful lot more companies into the fold in terms of putting requirements on them to have robust reporting processes that are going to be legally required of them. So I suppose that's just kind of at a high level, I suppose, just where the various different forces are coming from, whether it's customers, whether it's legislation, whether it's policy pieces. But I suppose just to go a little bit deeper in terms of some of this. And again, I'm probably not going to be putting up anything here that you haven't heard before, that you're not familiar of. But from the European perspective, we know, I suppose, in terms of the outcome of the Paris Agreement in 2015, that there is binding emission reduction is required for European member states all the way to 2030. And this is in place, I suppose, as a result of the Paris Agreement. And we're as a responsible member of the European Union, we have to ensure that we're doing our bit to meet these requirements, and that we're achieving these reductions year on year as well. And I suppose hence how that kind of works its way down into things like the Climate Action Plan as well. But other things at the EU level in terms of the farm to fork and biodiversity strategies, they're going to have an influence as well, and they're going to bring a whole host of new requirements as well. So, moving away from just looking at greenhouse gases and emissions as well, requirements and regulations around biodiversity and nature restoration and all of that. These are all things that are very much kind of coming at us, and things that need to be kind of factored in terms of how we approach the development of Origin Green as well. If there's going to be relevance for these things from a regulatory perspective, well then we have to ensure that the schemes that we have, whether they're at farm level or at company level, we have to ensure that at the very least we're ensuring that there's legal compliance in place for members as well. So again, as I said, it's how all this kind of filters its way down from a global piece in terms of the Paris Agreement to the European piece, and down to, I suppose, what we have ourselves now in terms of the Climate Action Plan and the implementation of that as well. So again, it's not something that will be new to any of the viewers this morning as well. We are very much aware of the targets that we have. We've a 51% reduction to be achieved by 2050, and in the meantime, it's a 25% reduction by 2030. And we all know that the challenge that's involved in that. We all know that I suppose the ask that's coming on the agricultural sector, in particular in terms of adoption of new and proven technologies to tackle greenhouse gas emissions, and trying to scale that between now and 2030 to give us a chance of hitting that target that's been set for the sector here as well. So just to move on a little bit and kind of come back to talking about the consumers a little bit, and obviously we would conduct a lot of customer and consumer research around the world as well. So try and understand, I suppose, what the consumers are thinking, so that we can position the promotions and the marketing that we do, so that it's enticing to them and it resonates with them, and it makes purchasing Irish food and drink something that's more appealing to them. And I suppose our own research says that 3/4 of consumers are making an effort to buy more sustainably produced food as well. And I suppose the thing to kind of say about that is that people's definition of sustainably produced food will differ based on where they are in the world, and I suppose what's influencing them in the geography that they're in, or in the market that they're in. So sustainability can be a fairly broad topic, and I suppose it's been able to try to speak to sustainability in its broadest terms and the different indicators that are relevant for different consumers in different markets. But the fact that we have so many, 3/4 of them, that are making that effort to buy sustainably produced food, I suppose it really kind of indicates the significance of being able to have really strong proof points to be able to talk about the positive aspects of Irish food internationally as well. If we look at things from a customer perspective, and when we talk about customers in Board B, we're more talking about the companies as opposed to the individuals. And the research that we do with companies, and in the last round of research, we particularly targeted buyers within the companies that we spoke to, because I suppose they're the ones that are actually making the purchasing decisions. They're the ones that the relationships between the Irish processors, those commercial relationships, that's where they are. They're at that level. It's with the buyers. It's not with the sustainability people in these companies. It's with the people that have the money and are spending the money. So we were keen to get the view from the buyers, and as you can see here, 72% of those buyers are saying that it's really important that they have suppliers with strong sustainability credentials. And I suppose aligned with that, we see that with 64% are saying that sustainability is an important aspect of their role. And the reason that we're seeing that now is that an awful lot of these buyers who are commercial people, their performance and their KPIs now include targets around sustainability. So, heretofore, where it may have been that their performance was reviewed based on the value they were getting in terms of the purchases they were making, or the volumes that they were able to purchase at a particular price or whatever it might be. Increasingly now they have targets that they need to set for as part of their performance review around sustainable sourcing. So look, that's an interesting development, and certainly one that we're seeing a more and more of a trend towards, in terms of the increasing link between sustainability and commercial aspects of a business. And I suppose the reason that we're seeing that is that we have all these companies out here, and we've just taken a few of the more recognizable names, I suppose, that we would engage with, and just kind of pulled a couple of very top line pieces out of their sustainability plans and strategies. So they're all looking at this. They're all setting their own targets that they need to deliver on, and they have to try and commit to and ensure that they hit these targets by the deadlines that they've set for themselves. But the challenge that these companies have is that a lot of the targets, particularly in relation to emissions, they have limited control over, and it's down to their suppliers and the role that their suppliers can play in helping them to hit the target. So while I suppose these are the commitments that they are making, ultimately these commitments translate into requirements for suppliers, and I suppose that's how it kind of trickles back down the line then as well, in terms of the requests and that come in relation to progress at company level, progress at farm level in areas such as greenhouse gas emissions or biodiversity or water quality or whatever it is. So it's all to try and ensure that they know where they can source the most sustainable produce. And again, it's about us being able to position ourselves to provide that option for them. I suppose just on the other side of it, we do know as well from engaging with these customers is that they like what they see here in Ireland. They like that the framework that we have here through Origin Green, the fact that it works across the full supply chain, that we have all stakeholders that are members and supporters and working collaboratively on it. As far as they're concerned, Origin Green meets their expectations, and it's a key infrastructure for them, to rely on in terms of helping them meet the commitments that they have as well. In terms of the processors, when we survey the companies, the Irish companies that we work with, about 70% of them have said to us that they feel that Origin Green is helping them to win business in markets internationally. So look, that's a positive endorsement, I suppose, for the program and their commitments and everyone else's commitments to the program as well. Just a very quick slide here as well in terms of some of the work that we do at international level. One of the organisations we participate in is the Sustainable Agricultural Initiative Platform, or SIDE platform. And within that, you have an awful lot of these global food companies that are participating and working in a pre-competitive way to try and align around things like sustainability. And they're developing sustainability frameworks or assessment frameworks that they're then rolling out to their suppliers. So I suppose in our engagement there, what we try and do and ensure is that whatever gets developed at that global level is aligned with what we're doing in relation to Origin Green, both at company level and at farm level, so that it eliminates the risk of duplication. It eliminates the risk of these food companies coming to their suppliers and saying, well, we know you have Origin Green, but now you need to do this as well. We're in a place now where they know we have Origin Green. They know it stacks up very well against what they're looking for in terms of the assessment frameworks that they're developing, and advise those additional asks coming back on top of the Irish suppliers, be it again at company level or farm level. So I suppose just to move on and just talk a little bit more about Origin Green and our strategy and where we're going and some of the things that we're doing. We have a very clear vision in terms of what we want. We want a thriving agri-food sector that is responsive to the future needs of people on our planet. But I suppose what we kind of focus on more is our purpose, and like it's been mentioned already, at the start with Pat, in terms of what we're here to do. We're here to power improve the sustainability of the industry here as well. And I suppose if we look at the areas that we're kind of focusing on, if we kind of put them into two kind of pillars, we're looking at a climate neutral and nature positive pathway, and then proving responsible choices. And I suppose within these two broad areas, there's particular areas of focus that we're looking on, and it's under these areas of focus, I suppose, is where we get down into the finer detail in terms of the individual projects and initiatives that we're developing, in terms of the individual updates that we might be making to the farm programs or to the company programs as well. But I suppose this is what guides us. We take all those learnings that we get in the marketplace through the research, and we look at, I suppose, what's coming from a regulatory perspective, from a policy perspective, and things like that as well. And we try and develop a strategy to ensure that we're going to fulfil the needs and meet the demands, I suppose, that are coming at us down the line as well. And again, very much linked into the broader piece in terms of food vision as well, and falling in under mission 1 of food vision, which talks about a climate smart, environmentally sustainable agri-food sector. And I suppose the importance of Origin Green is called out here and is identified by the fact that it's referenced over 70 times in the food vision document. So I suppose from our perspective, there's a lot of responsibility being placed on Origin Green in terms of delivering on the government strategy or the part of agriculture strategy and policy piece. And again, the ambition, I suppose, within there that I mentioned earlier on in terms of growing value and volume of exports as well. So I suppose just to get in to talk about some of the updates that are coming, and as I said, we're constantly kind of updating Origin Green. We've done a lot of changes in the last couple of years at company level, where we're putting more requirements on companies in relation to targets that they're required to set, the number of targets that they have to set, and I suppose looking at the approach of how we can ask the companies that have capacity and scale to do more, and balancing that then with maybe some smaller operations who would be challenged in terms of resources and be that personnel or financial, to try and implement things to the same level as some of the much larger manufacturers that we have here as well. But to kind of focus on the farm side of things as well, we're in the process of reviewing our primary producer standards. So our beef and lamb standard is the largest one. We've about 53,000 farmers that are participating in that scheme. Then followed by the dairy scheme, which pretty much every dairy farmer in the country is a member of that now as well. But we also have the standards and schemes in place for pigs, poultry, eggs, and horticulture as well. And there's commonality across these standards, even though they all operate as individual standards. So we're in a process at the moment of amalgamating all these standards into one standard. And really, I suppose it's about trying to build more efficiencies into how the schemes operate and how the schemes run, both for Borbia as an organisation, but also for scheme members as well. We have situations where we're visiting the same farm to conduct a dairy audit and do a poultry audit or a pig audit. So it's about trying to ensure that we can find a more efficient way of working. And I suppose if we kind of think about what are the core values that we want to kind of keep at the heart of the new standard, it's very much around the animal welfare, sustainability and traceability and food safety as well. So, it's not that we're making wholesale changes here in terms of what are going to be the requirements that we expect to be implemented at farm level. There will be changes, but a lot of everything that's there already will remain there. So it's not going to mean that there's going to be any sort of change in terms of how the process looks or feels at farm level when the auditor comes along at some stage in the future once we go through the process. So I suppose in terms of developing and revising that standard, there's a whole process to that as well. We have a draft standard that's been put together now at the moment. And the next step is to develop or to put in place a technical advisory committee. And these technical advisory committees, or the TACs as we call them, they are made up of representatives from all the stakeholders. So the farm organisations, we have industry, with technical input from Teagasc and from ICBF and from some of the universities. There's input from Food Safety Authority, from Department of Agriculture and so on. And ultimately, it's the tax that will go through the proposals for the new standard, and they're the ones that will agree and sign off on the requirements that eventually become the final standard. So we're hoping to kick off that process next month. Now we're in the process of invites have gone out to the various different stakeholder organisations to look for nominees to participate in the tax. We'll hopefully get the first of those up and running next month, and once we kind of get to the end of the process, we have a whole other piece of work that we need to do in terms of having the schemes accredited. So that's where we put them forward for review by the Irish National Accreditation Board, and they bring in their experts to review the standards and challenges in terms of what they think is good or bad about those standards. But we're working, I suppose this is the timeline that we're working to, hopefully by the middle of next year we'll be in a place to be rolling out that new standard. I suppose, look, benefits to doing this, I kind of talked about this, it's really about trying to build more efficiencies in terms of how we operate as an organisation, but also build more efficiencies in from a farmer perspective. And that we're changing this approach that we have to standard development, which has been kind of ad hoc up to now, to one where we're moving into a more structured cycle of review and update every 4 years as well. So I suppose the other thing that I just want to talk about in terms of developments is AgNav, and this is probably the most significant development that we have at the moment, and it is very much a partnership between Teagasc, Board BA and ICBF. And really what this is about is kind of leveraging the resources of each individual organisation to try and come up with a solution for farmers that really kind of supports them in their efforts to implement sustainability actions on their farm as well. So I suppose from a Teagasc perspective, the scientific expertise is there, the research is ongoing to develop the systems and develop the models that allows for very accurate measurement of what's happening on individual farms. And then if you add to this the advisory service that's in place there, the ability to kind of work one-to-one with farmers in terms of assessing the situation and developing a plan that's going to have a positive impact from an environmental perspective. With ICBF, they've a fantastic IT infrastructure there and very well resourced in that regard as well. And really good databases with lots of really powerful information in there that's all relevant for understanding, I suppose, where a farm currently stands. And then from a Board BA perspective, I suppose, look, we have an infrastructure there that's been tried and tested for over 20 years now with the QA side of things. We have a survey piece to the audit that most farmers will be familiar with, where we're capturing that information in relation to sustainability, and it's looking at how we can kind of feed all that into the whole process of developing really accurate carbon footprints for farmers as well. So I suppose it'll be an online platform. We'll have kind of 3 elements to it, and I suppose we're kind of looking at this cycle of assessed, analysed, and act. So the assessment piece is not going to be something new. It's the assessment that's there as part of the QA schemes, and farmers are very familiar with that already, and that's gathering the information in relation to what's happening at farm level. We've a new forecaster tool then that allows farmers and advisors to kind of play around with different things in relation to maybe fertilizer or slurry management at farm level and see what impact that has. And then the final piece is the action. So once you kind of identify what's appropriate for the farm, create an action list or a sustainability plan or task list for the farm as well. So just to, I suppose, won't kind of dwell too much on these, but just to kind of give a bit of a line of sight on them. The assessment piece, as I said, this is what farmers will be familiar with in terms of the Board B audit. So it's the information in relation to housing and turnout, manure management, fertilizer, feed, all of that as well. That's, I suppose, the data collection piece, or the assessment piece, as we're calling it. And then the analyze piece, so this is the tool where, again, if farmers want to look at the use of nitrogen fertilizer on the farm and kind of see, right, well, if I was to reduce the amount of nitrogen fertilizer that I use, or if I was to make changes from using a can-based fertilizer to protected urea, well, what sort of impact will that have in terms of the carbon footprint and the greenhouse gas emissions and ammonia emissions for the farm as well. And I suppose in terms of the follow-on from that, so you engage with the tool and you kind of identify what's possible or what's reasonable or what's feasible for your own individual farm, move on to developing that kind of action list then as well. And there is a tool there now for that as well that farmers will be able to access and kind of look at the list of actions that they want to implement, select them, and kind of put it into an action list or a plan. And I suppose it becomes a focal point for future engagement between themselves and the advisor, or it's there as a guide or a reference for themselves to use as they go about implementing the plan. So we're still early days on this. There's a huge amount of time and resource been put towards the development of this in the early stages. It's been rolled out with farmers who have signed up to the Teagasc Climate Advisory Service, and that's there's training, I suppose, that's ongoing at the moment with the advisors for that service as well, with a view to starting to roll this out over the next number of months. Just a couple of slides in terms of engagement. I suppose engagement from a Board B perspective works in a couple of different ways. We look at engagement with farmers. Well, there's direct engagement, I suppose, through the newsletter that goes out 3 times a year, a text message that we send out to the membership bases, and so on. And then I suppose, look, there's engagement online as well in terms of some of the social media side of things as well. We have partnerships then with the agri-media as well, and if anyone has seen the Farmers Journal from yesterday, you see there's two-page spread in terms of that's put together by the manager of the China office, and just trying to explain, I suppose, the situation in the China market, where the opportunities are, how we're operating over there, and what's happening in that market, and how it kind of translates to potential opportunities for Irish food and drink over there as well. We also, work with the likes of Teagasc and some of the processors in delivery of farm walks and on-farm events throughout the year as well. And I suppose this slide just kind of gives an idea. It's just a few images that were kind of pulled from, whether it's the social media or whether it's the agri press. But just again, I suppose you'll be familiar with seeing this from your involvement or engagement with the different media forums. And then finally, I suppose the other piece of engagement is the market engagement of what we do out there. And I suppose we just a couple of images that are taken here from some of the trade shows that we participate in every year. So every year, Board B would participate in anywhere between 25 and 30 trade shows around the world. And typically what happens is we buy a space, and then, we bring all the companies that are relevant, I suppose, along with us. They get the opportunity to kind of take up some of that space on the stand there as well, and do their own promotions and engagements with customers in the market there as well. So, a lot of these shows will have a particular focus. There may be a dairy focus, there may be a seafood focus, there may be an alcohol focus or a beef focus. And again, we try and ensure that we get an even spread in terms of the sectors that are represented, and also in terms of the markets that we are engaging in as well. So I think I've probably gone a little bit over time, Pat, and apologies about that. But and I know I was kind of flying through a lot of those slides as well. But
no, you're perfectly on time. There's no problem there at all. Thanks for that. That's fairly comprehensive. And I'm just looking at the questions. Remind you to put your questions through. You might just stop sharing there. Remind people to use the Q&A to send through their questions. I see one coming through which kind of gets to the nub of the problem pretty rapidly, and I'll give you that one first. Can you provide more detail on how you verify a certain standard has been met? How do you ensure claims made by the farmer, for instance, is correct? This is going to be particularly important in relation to carbon farming, for instance.
Yeah, so I suppose the schemes and standards that we operate are all accredited schemes of standards. So, I talked about that process in terms of the standard development, but actually a very challenging part of the process is actually going through the accreditation of the scheme. So Board BA is an accredited certification body as well. So we're subject to our audits every year from National Standards Authority of Ireland, from the Irish National Accreditation Board, from the USDA in the States, from Global Gap, and so on. So, as an accredited certification body, we've a huge amount of work that we need to do in terms of maintaining a quality management system and ensuring that we can hold on to the accredited status of the individual schemes. So, I suppose that means that when it comes to how we're rolling them out at farm level, there's always a focus on that. So those assessments and audits that we go through, they come and they look at how we do those assessments on farm. They do witnessed audits with auditors as well. And I suppose in terms of the data that's collected, okay, so we might not ask a farmer to keep a record of the date, a written record of the date that turned out the cows or the date to house the cows. But, we have very experienced auditors on the ground. And if an auditor is on the ground and they ask that farmer, when did you turn the cows out this year? And the farmer gives a date and he says, I turned them out on the 10th of January. And the auditor is standing on a farm, in somewhere with really heavy, wet, boggy land, where they know that this is not normal for this part of the country. They will obviously challenge that, so it's not about ensuring that there's a record in place for absolutely everything that we collect in relation to the farm activity, but it's about verifying that what is being provided makes sense as well. As time moves on then as well, it's about trying to get access to more and more information in central databases. So if we look at the animal inventories that are used in terms of the carbon footprint models, we don't ask farmers any of that because we have a brilliant database there in terms of the animal identification and movement system that is hugely accurate. So we just tap straight into that and we use that information. And as time moves on and things like a fertilizer register, come into play, there's opportunities there then to kind of remove the burden, I suppose, in terms of the ask at farm level to get that information more centrally. And the more we can do that, the more robust it can be, and the more we'll be able to kind of stand over, I suppose, the validity of that data.
Yeah, and as you say, with breeding data as well, we will have in the next couple of years a huge proportion of the data that's required coming from those very accurate central databases. So it should provide really, really accurate figures. Andy, a good few questions coming in there.
Yeah, the good few questions. Loads of compliments, Mick, and an excellent presentation. I'll try and maybe pull some of them together or get through as many of them as we can. The first one really is about food security. And what do you think of Ireland's food security in the face of climate change, and from a sustainability perspective? Do we need to incentivise a shift from livestock to crop production? Now, I know horticulture forms part of your brief as well, Mick. Maybe not your brief personally, but
yeah, but look, it's a very good question. And if we take the big sectors of dairy and beef, the vast majority of what we produce is going for export. If we look at the horticulture sector, we don't export, with the exception of mushrooms, which, over 95% of the mushrooms produced here go for export. We don't export on the horticulture side. In fact, we've quite a lot of imports coming in on the horticulture side. I suppose, look, we haven't been exposed to the worst effects of supply chain challenges in that regard, because I suppose we still have a significant amount of horticulture being produced in the country. But if we look at, and we've seen the pictures of bare shelves in the UK, which is not that far away because of dependence on product coming in from places in Southern Europe where production challenges, be it drought or whatever it was, meant that the crops weren't there and the produce wasn't there. From our perspective, we try and support the industry as best we can. And I suppose there is a challenge there because pressure that comes on the horticulture sector, particularly from retail side of things. And I think what we've seen over the last kind of 12 months in particular is a little bit of a realization among some of the retailers that they've gone too far. And that they've kind of squeezed too much on the horticulture sector. And we're starting to see some of those retailers kind of coming back now and starting to have more positive conversations around in terms of what they can do to support the agriculture sector. So they've kind of woken up and they've seen the risk. They've seen what's happening, because we have had a number of growers and producers leave the sector over the last 12 to 24 months. So there's been a real bit of a wake-up call there, I think, for the customer there in that. And I think if we can kind of capitalize on that and we can build on that, well, then hopefully the question of security starts to go away.
Does any Northern Irish produce feed into the chains of produce by some of the companies, Mick, and thereby would they be expected to meet the same standards, or and has there been any implication because of Brexit?
Yeah, so we anything that carries the Borbia Q mark that people would be familiar with means that it's born, reared, and processed in Ireland, or grown and processed in Ireland. Now, there are situations where there's different variations of the logo that would mean that something may be processed in Northern Ireland. So some of our processors have operations in Northern Ireland, and we'll see them maybe have animals born, reared here, but maybe and slaughtered here, but maybe processed in Northern Ireland. But there's different variations of the logo, and as part of the audits and checks that we do at processor level, a big part of that is ensuring that where logos are applied, that it's the correct logos that are being used, if they can be used at all. But in reality, we don't see much of them being used at all, and most people kind of stick with the Origin Ireland logo, and to really kind of just I suppose use the power and the value that's been built into that over a good number of years now, in terms of the calling out the QA message on their projects.
Hedgerows, Mick, do you collect data on hedgerows on your farm assessments? And is there any the management of those hedgerows, or even the removal of those hedgerows, are they picked up anywhere along the line that would either give a farmer a good sustainability score or a bad sustainability score?
Yeah, what we collect, I suppose, is I suppose a net change in terms of addition or removal of hedgerows. And the models that exist at the moment, don't account for removals of carbon, and really, I suppose, we're not at a place yet in terms of the science and the research to be able to do that accurately. Sequestration is not recognised within the models that we used, because it's not recognised internationally, I suppose, in terms of the models that are recognised internationally. But as time moves on and as the research moves on, it will give us the opportunity to take that into account. And the work, I suppose, that's been done by Teagasc through the National Soil Carbon Observatory is really kind of key to that, and will feed into that. And we do very much hope to be in a position in a few years' time where we'll be able to account for removals that's happening on farm as well. Now, I think, and Pat might want to comment on this, but, when it comes to hedgerows, the potential of hedgerows, is maybe not as great as the potential of forestry, or the potential of land itself in some cases as well. So while it is an important piece, in the overall grand scheme of things, it may not contribute a huge amount of what we might expect it to do.
Yeah, and I suppose the context of the question was also in relation to the contribution of hedgerows to biodiversity, and I suppose we're seeing a lot of development in baseline requirement in relation to the management of hedgerows, allowing them to grow to a much higher and broader hedgerows, but also looking at potential for minimum requirements for space for nature on farms. So there is movements in those directions as well, which is, I suppose, working parallel to some of the work that you would be doing, Mick.
Yeah.
Pretty question straight to the point, Mick. Will a farmer's greenhouse gas score on AgNav determine whether a farmer will be deemed quality assured, or will all the practices be quality assured regardless of his carbon footprint?
So will the GHG score and AgNav determine your status? Whether you can, no, and we can be categorical on that. Look, the quality assurance standard is there. The conformance with that is going to be based on the requirements within the standard, not on whether you have a high or a low carbon footprint or GHG emission total figure. Like when we're talking about AgNav, the vision for AgNav is that it reaches beyond QA membership. It's not something that we're saying is exclusively for farmers that are in the scheme, throughout the scheme. We're not saying it's exclusively for something for farmers that are Teagasc clients or not Teagasc clients. We want AgNav to be something that's open and available to all farmers, regardless of whether they have any sort of engagement with Board BIA, with Teagasc, with ICBF. I suppose the stage we're at now at the minute, Andy, is still very early on. Yeah. We have 3 organisations as the partner organisation, so I suppose we're working with what we have in terms of the linkages with our own membership base, be that QA scheme members or Teagasc clients or ICBF clients as well. But certainly as time moves on, we want it to be there for everyone. And your use or non-use of it will have no impact in terms of your quality assurance.
Yeah, because I know I was often even asked myself, if my carbon footprint is X, and is there going to be a minimum standard in order for me to qualify because my carbon footprint isn't as good as my neighbours or as good as the national average or whatever? There's no real. It's really an exercise to pull everyone up really at the minute.
Yeah, and look, we're not in a position to say what's a good or bad footprint for your farm. We could say this is the footprint for your farm. This is how it compares to similar type farms, but we don't know the exact conditions that are influencing the figures on your farm. So we can't say that, because your carbon footprint is 10% higher than the average, that's a bad footprint for your farm. That could be a very good footprint for your farm because you're working under extremely difficult conditions or whatever it might be. So I can't ever see us, Andy, going to a stage where we're saying you have to have X of a carbon footprint in order to be quality assured. It wouldn't be feasible. It wouldn't be fair.
I suppose, having said that, Mick, one of the things that kind of goes with the Origin Green is the whole establishment of sustainability standards at purchaser level and potentially sustainability bonuses where farmers are potentially rewarded for implementing technologies and practices that are leading to higher level or lower levels of emissions and lower levels of losses. So it's not as if the issue is being ignored by the commercial part either. There is a lot of work beginning to happen in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen a few fairly solid examples there now of different processors leading out with their sustainability bonuses, and the bonuses are dependent on different things being implemented at farm level as well. And that's really positive to see. But I think the important thing there is that we're able to track that and we're able to see what's happening, because that forms part of the bigger story as well. And I'm not just talking about from a Borbia perspective in terms of what we might want to say in a campaign in the marketplace, the other side of the world, but for the sector in general, to be able to kind of aggregate all that information and say, well, we have there X number of farms are implementing this on farm or doing that on farm. And it's about building that story of positive participation, positive engagement, positive adoption of things that are going to make a difference.
A question here, Mick, about, and you mentioned it with your, you've been doing it for 10 years and not too many other countries are doing it, but it says, how far ahead are we of other countries, both within the EU and elsewhere, in Ireland's sustainability accreditation and audit program? And are any other countries auditing or providing food sustainability to the same extent? I mean, I can think of the red tractor in the UK, or so. Is there? I'd say, to give a very simple answer, I'd say no. There's no one doing it. Now, that's not to say there aren't people out there that are doing good stuff and have really good schemes and really good initiatives. But if we look at it in terms of the coverage that we have, and the fact that it's a national program, if you go to other countries, you might see multiple programs. And no linkages between them, and looking at different things and measuring different things and assessing different things. The beauty, I suppose, of what we have here is that everyone is kind of aligned behind the one approach. And it's something that, we see time and time again when we have, be it inward buyer visits or inward journalist visits, which is all part of the work that we do from that kind of promotions piece as well. It's always something that kind of really, really impresses them. The fact that there's such a collaborative approach between the different stakeholders in the industry here, the fact that, the likes of Borbia and Teagasc and ICBF can pool the resources, to work together to deliver something that's really powerful and really valuable. And it's really, they're amazed by, I suppose, the quantity and the quality of information and data that we have that's been generated through the QA schemes that exists on ICBF database, that's there in Teagasc, and how it all kind of links back into that scientific research, that knowledge, that expertise, and how it kind of gets rolled out through knowledge transfer and all that as well. So that's always something that really impresses. We have, I would say, we have much better structures than anybody else. We have the infrastructure that's the envy of an awful lot of people. But as I said, there is other individual initiatives out there. Some of them are private that are very, very good. And, people can tell a really good and really positive story about them. And sometimes, from our perspective, we kind of hold ourselves back, I feel, because we want to be sure that what we're saying can be backed up by facts and figures as well. But I would still say, Andy, we're one very important comment or question, and I've spoken to you about this before. It says, to what extent do Irish food sustainability credentials deliver a price benefit for Irish farmers? Is the price benefit absorbed by processors, exporters? For example, the recent challenging lamb prices, like the sustainability of Irish lamb, or you could make the same question about beef. And that is a question that I know I've heard you answer and try and answer on a few occasions.
Yeah. Well, look. I suppose there's a few things to it. Look, when we're so export reliant, you're always at the mercy of market forces anyway, and that's one thing. And I suppose we kind of go back and we say, right, well, prior to any QA schemes or anything like that, where were we? Where were we competing? What were we doing? And we weren't doing very well. We weren't competing very strongly. We didn't have any kind of really strong customers and things like that. And over time, that started to change as we put the systems in place, and we were able to kind of then go to the market, go to the customers, and show them what we had here. And over time, it became the norm that quality assurance, food safety, traceability, that was all there. Now that's simply evolved, Andy. So and I've said it to you before that, customers kind of take it for granted that you have the product safety, that you have the traceability. Shouldn't take it for granted, but they do. They assume that, that it's all there. They know the systems that we have now as well. And they're kind of looking at what else needs to be delivered. So if you go back to earlier in the presentation when I talked about commitments that these companies are making, and those commitments are centered around sustainability. And what they want to do is try and say, right, well, actually, if these are the commitments I'm going to make, and I'm dependent on my suppliers to help me make those commitments, what suppliers should I be working with? So the opportunity or the return might never be seen in terms of a line on a milk check or a line on a factory statement or anything like that. But actually, the return is that, these buyers internationally look at the suppliers from Ireland and look what they can offer them in terms of helping them deliver on their targets. And that makes Ireland a more attractive place for them to source from, because they can rely on the information, they can rely on the data, and they know that it's even there in the first place, I suppose, Andy. So it's about the opportunity to kind of build those more long-term strategic relationships between the companies here and the buyers internationally. That gives that level of security, that you're not kind of at the whims of market forces to the same extent, or you're not kind of reliant on maybe one-off transactional deals that there isn't very little value in. And if you can get to a place where you have that more long-term strategic relationship in place, well, it opens up opportunities to have more conversations about returns in relation to sustainability and the value of sustainability, and how that starts to get recognised in their contracts and negotiations.
Couple of quick. Sorry, Andy.
Well, I was just something probably we should have asked earlier, and it's come in a couple of times. There's organic farming.
Yeah, that's
the number of organic farmers having doubled from 2,000 to 4,000 over the past 6 months. Are there any plans to increase the marketing of Irish organic produce, and are there plans to differentiate organic from origin green?
Yeah, so there's so we've recently appointed a new sector manager for organics in Borbia, Emmett Doyle. And Emmett is in the process of putting together an organic strategy as well. So there's increasingly, I suppose, there's more and more of a focus on organics from a promotional perspective. So we have some of the research and the insight work done in the marketplace to try and identify where the opportunities might be in that regard. And then it's up to, I suppose, Emmett to lead the charge on that in terms of developing the plan and the strategy, and working with the international offices and the staff in the international offices to roll out the campaigns, to roll out the campaigns there in the markets, I suppose, where the best opportunities are. I suppose in terms of the promotions, we wouldn't be differentiating it from Origin Green. Like, Origin Green doesn't differentiate between systems. Like, organic is a system. So we will call out that it's organic, but it's organic under an Origin Green umbrella as well, in the same way as the other promotions, I suppose, that we're doing is done under the Origin Green umbrella. Promotions we do on organic will be done under the Origin Green umbrella as well.
One final question, Mick. Just in the new sustainability and quality assurance standards, it's I suppose one of the issues that has come up over the last number of years has been animal welfare. To what degree are you taking on board animal welfare issues in the new tax, or increasing it in its importance?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, and it's a really topical area. And I mentioned earlier on about sustainability and talking about sustainability in its broadest context. Well, animal welfare always comes in there. And again, when we do our market research, particularly in European markets, animal welfare is really, really high on the agenda. And we have particular challenges in markets like Germany and the Netherlands, where there's huge pressure from welfare lobby groups and NGOs and so on as well. But not just them. It's the average general consumer that is very conscious of it. So, from our perspective, when it comes to the standard, there's areas that we need to strengthen the standard, particularly around things like pain management and the use of anaesthetic and analgesic for any sort of painful procedure as well. We have need to kind of look at how we call out, space allowances for animals when they're in sheds and things like that as well. But I suppose another thing that we've been looking at is indicator assessments, so animal-based measures. And we've done some pilot work on this. We've tested out an assessment, an indicator assessment on about 120 or 30 farms, where an assessor goes out and they kind of look at the animals, I suppose, in terms of looking at body condition, looking at core condition, looking at incidences of lameness, looking at discharge from the nose or the eyes, so animal-based indicators that help to kind of build a picture in terms of the welfare profile of animals on that farm. And from that pilot that we did, we found that there was really positive engagement from farmers on this. I think the feedback we got from farmers was, well, this is great. You're spending more time looking at the animals, and I think anyone that knows Irish farmers knows that it's about the welfare of the animals and how they mind the animals, and that's the most important thing to them. So I think they really appreciated seeing that focus being put on actual looking at the state and the condition of the animals and how they are. So we think there's a real opportunity to work this sort of assessment into the future audits. And I suppose in doing the pilots, it allowed us to learn, well, how easy is this to do? How long is it going to take? And I suppose we've got good answers to all of those. We can do these assessments relatively quickly. The indicators are relatively easy to assess. But what it actually gives us is really, really useful and powerful information to be able to talk about high welfare standards in the marketplace today. So moving from this kind of input kind of thing in terms of, well, is there good ventilation in the sheds and that sort of thing, to actually, output measures that kind of say, there's no doubt, but, all the indicators, all the signs, the visual signs that we're looking for in these animals tell us that these animals are really well cared for, and that welfare on these farms is at an absolute optimum.
Okay, listen, we're going to have to leave it there. We could go on for another while and plenty more questions there. Listen, thank you very much, Mick, for that. It's I suppose provides a huge amount of information on the work that you're doing and on the importance of the work for the industry in general. So thanks for that. Next week, we're being joined by Stephen Connolly, and it's kind of almost a follow-on. He's the Ag Sustainability Manager with ABP, and he'll be looking at ABP agri-sustainability journey and commitments. So that's next Friday morning at the same time. I'd like to also thank our production team of Andy Boland and Yvonne Marr. And until next week, have a nice weekend and a good week. Thanks very much.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.